The night we arrived at the cabin, the moon was red. I should have turned back then. I should have known, but we laughed it off, called it an omen of good luck, a sign that our little weekend getaway would be special. And it was just not in the way we expected. There were 5 of us. Me, Daniel, Claire, Mark, and Lucy. Old friends looking to escape life for a few days, to drink, tell stories, and relive our youth. The cabin was deep in the woods, isolated, exactly what we wanted. It started with the symbols, carved into the walls, etched into the floorboards. Circles with sharp angles, intricate designs that made my stomach churn just looking at them. Probably just old markings, Mark said. People messing around. But Claire found something worse. A book bound in something that wasn't quite leather, filled with pages that smelled of decay. The writing inside wasn't English, wasn't anything we recognized. The last page, however, had something new. Fresh ink, written in shaky letters. Blood Moon, 1 of 5. We joked about it, made stupid dares. Then Lucy, always the bravest, ran a knife across her palm, pressing it against the page. Now we're part of the club. She laughed. The wind outside howled. The cabin door slammed shut on its own. We tried to shake it off, blamed the booze, the paranoia of being out in the wilderness. But that night, I woke to the sound of whispering. I thought it was Claire. She was in the bunk below mine, but when I peered over, she was dead asleep. The whispering wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from beneath the floor. I held my breath, my body frozen in place. The whispers grew louder, shifting between voices, overlapping like a chorus. Some were pleading, others were laughing, and one was saying, "My name." I shot up, nearly falling out of bed. The cabin was silent again. My heart pounded as I stepped carefully toward the living room, but I wasn't the only one awake. Lucy stood by the fireplace, her back to me. The book lay open in front of her. Her lips moved silently, tracing the unreadable words. Lucy. My voice was barely above a whisper. She turned. Her eyes were hollow, empty. "We have to finish it," she said. Mark's scream cut through the night. We ran to his room. But when we opened the door, he was gone. The window was shattered, glass, and blood on the floor. The woods outside were black, an endless void, but in the distance, something moved between the trees. Tall, wrong, watching. Panic set in. We grabbed our things, ready to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The windows wouldn't break. The symbols on the walls had changed, new words. Fresh carvings. Blood Moon. 2 of 5. Daniel lost it, started screaming, slamming his fists against the walls. Claire was crying, and Lucy was smiling. She took the knife from her pocket, dragging it across her palm once more. "We have to finish it," she whispered. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. I don't remember the door opening, the woods parting. I just remember running until my lungs burned, until the whispers faded behind me. I reached the road by dawn, bloody, bruised, alone. The cabin was gone. No one believes me. They say we got lost, that Mark and the others were never real, that I made it all up, but I know what I saw, and every time the moon turns red, I hear Lucy's voice in the wind. We have to finish it. I should have listened to the warnings. The old man at the gas station had given me a long, pitying look when I told him I was staying in the abandoned cabin deep in the woods. "You don't want to go there," he said, shaking his head. "That's Hollow Man's Land." I laughed it off. Just another backwoods legend, I thought. I was wrong. The first night was uneventful, but something about the cabin felt off. The air inside was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The walls were covered in deep scratches, long and deliberate, as if something had clawed at them for years. At first, I told myself they were from animals, but animals don't carve words. The markings weren't random. As I ran my fingers over them, I realized they formed letters. A single sentence, repeated over and over. Don't let him in. I told myself it was just an old prank. Maybe a scare tactic to keep people away. But that night, I woke up gasping for air, my lungs burning as if something was pressing down on my chest. The cabin was silent, but I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. I reached for my flashlight and scanned the room. Nothing, but when I turned toward the window, my breath hitched. There was a figure standing just beyond the tree line, tall, thin, featureless. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then it moved. Not like a person, there was no natural rhythm to its steps. It lurched forward, like something trying to imitate human movement, but failing. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to dial for help, but there was no signal. My heart pounded as I locked the door and backed away. Then, the scratching started. Not from the walls, not from the floor, from inside the cabin. I turned slowly, my stomach twisting into knots. The words on the walls, "Don't let him in," were changing. The scratches deepened, shifting before my eyes, reforming into something else. Too late. The room went cold. My breath formed in misty clouds in front of me. The door rattled violently, the handle twisting as if something was trying to force its way inside. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and that's when I heard it, a slow, ragged whisper right behind me. "Let me in." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I bolted for the door, yanking it open, not caring what was outside, as long as it wasn't inside. But as I stepped onto the porch, I froze. The figure was gone, but the door had been locked from the inside. I never saw it, never heard it enter, but it had. And somehow, it had locked me out. The realization hit me like a freight train. Whatever had been scratching at the walls, whispering in the darkness, it was inside now, and I was the one left outside. I ran. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the keys in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the dirt road, my headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. But just as I reached the highway, I caught one final glimpse in my rearview mirror. The cabin's door was wide open, and something was standing in the doorway, watching me leave. I came to the cabin to escape, to disconnect from the world. I didn't know then that some places should be left forgotten. The cabin belonged to my great-grandfather, a man whose name was only whispered in my family. No one spoke of what happened to him, only that he was lost to the woods. When I inherited the place, I was warned not to go, but I dismissed their fears as old wives' tales. The moment I arrived, something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, as if the forest was holding its breath. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood and thyme. The furniture was covered in dust, except for one thing, a book resting on the kitchen table. Its leather cover was cracked with age, and its pages were filled with strange symbols and unfamiliar words. I should have left it alone, but I didn't. That night, I woke to the sound of something moving beneath the floorboards. A rhythmic, deliberate scraping. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the sound was too precise, too steady. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the noise to the corner of the cabin, where a rug lay strangely out of place. Beneath it, a trapdoor. The air that rushed out when I lifted the hatch was stale, rotten. A narrow staircase led downward, swallowed by darkness. I hesitated, but curiosity overpowered fear. The steps groaned under my weight as I descended into the hidden chamber below. The room was small, carved into the earth itself. Symbols, identical to those in the book, covered the walls, drawn in something dark, something that smelled like rust and decay. And in the center of the room stood a stone altar, its surface cracked and worn. Chains hung from the walls, broken and rusted. Then I saw it, a figure, twisted and bound, lying atop the altar. Its flesh was shriveled, but its mouth was open in a silent scream, and its eyes sunken in black were locked onto mine. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The book slipped from my grip, hitting the ground with a hollow thud. And that's when the whispering started. Not from above. Not from the woods. From the thing on the altar. I couldn't understand the words, but the voice was deep, guttural, ancient. The chains rattled as its limbs twitched, the dry skin stretching, as if it were still alive. Then the whispers turned to laughter. The air in the room grew suffocating, pressing against my chest like unseen hands. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. But the whispers didn't stop. They seeped through the floorboards, through the walls, through me. I grabbed my keys, ready to flee. But when I reached the door, I froze. My reflection in the small window wasn't my own. My face was pale, sunken. My mouth twisted in the same silent scream as the thing on the altar. The laughter swelled, filling the cabin, the woods, my mind. The floor trembled beneath me, as if something massive was waking below. I ran. I don't remember the drive back to town, only that the whispers followed me. That night, I burned the book, watching the symbols blacken and curl in the flames. I thought it was over, but every night, just before I fall asleep, I hear a Tay voice in the darkness, whispering my name. The cabin stood at the heart of the forest, nestled between towering pines, untouched by time. I had been warned not to stay here, but the idea of complete solitude, away from the noise of the city, was too tempting. The place belonged to my grandfather, who vanished decades ago, leaving behind only cryptic stories of voices in the trees. I didn't believe in such things, at least, not until the first night. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon, the whispers began. Faint, indistinct murmurs, drifting in with the night breeze. I stood on the porch, my flashlight scanning the dense tree line. The forest was eerily still. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the whispers, weaving through the air, like tendrils of fog. I strained to listen, but the voices never formed into words. Just a maddening hum that settled into my bones. I told myself it was the wind, but then the knocking started. A single, deliberate tap against the window behind me. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. The glass reflected only my own terrified face. But the moment I looked away, tap, 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 dot. I locked the windows, bolted the door, and retreated to the cabin's bedroom, clutching the old hunting knife I had found in a drawer. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. It was as if dozens of voices were murmuring just outside the cabin, their hushed tones overlapping in a twisted lullaby. I barely slept, my ears filled with the ceaseless, inhuman chorus. The next morning, I ventured outside. The ground around the cabin was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of visitors. But something felt off. The trees seemed closer than before, their gnarled branches reaching toward the cabin like skeletal fingers. And the whispers, they hadn't stopped. Even in broad daylight, they slithered through the air, curling around my ears like invisible vines. I shouted into the woods, demanding whoever was out there to show themselves. And they did. A figure stood between the trees, motionless, watching. Its features were obscured by shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing and hollow. I took a step back, and in the blink of an eye, it was gone. But the whispers, they were closer now. Inside the cabin, I ran back, slamming the door behind me, my pulse hammering in my skull. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet, but I wasn't moving. I stood frozen as the whispering voices rose to an unbearable crescendo. And then, they spoke. "Join us." A scream tore from my throat as the bedroom door swung open. The air inside was thick with shadows, and in the center of the room stood my grandfather. No, not him. Something wearing his face. His mouth moved, but the whispers came from all around, seeping from the walls, the floor, the very air I breathed. I ran. I don't remember grabbing my bag. Don't remember flinging open the door. Only remember sprinting through the forest. The whispers chasing me. The trees shifting as if trying to trap me inside their labyrinth. I didn't stop until I reached my car, gasping for air. The cabin loomed in the distance, barely visible through the tangled branches. The whispers faded as the engine roared to life. But as I drove away, my rearview mirror showed something I will never forget. The cabin was gone. In its place stood nothing but trees, their bark carved with hundreds of silent, screaming faces, and they were still whispering. I never should have come here. That thought echoed in my mind as I sat in the corner of the old wooden cabin, my back pressed against the cold, rotting walls. The candle in front of me flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls, whispering unspeakable things in the silence. Outside, the wind howled through the dense forest, making the trees sway like skeletal fingers, reaching for something unseen. I had come to this remote cabin for solitude, a break from the chaos of my life. It belonged to my late uncle, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. They never found his body, only his journal, its pages filled with unsettling entries about shadows that moved on their own and whispers that came from the walls. I thought he had lost his mind. Now, I wasn't so sure. The first night, it started smaller, dark shape flickering at the edge of my vision. The feeling of being watched, a whisper so faint I could almost convince myself I imagined it. But the second night, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I woke up to find my chair overturned, the door slightly ajar, despite locking it before bed. The air smelled of damp wood, and something else, something metallic. Blood. I found a trail of dark stains, leading to the cabin's back room, a place I had yet to explore. My uncle's journal lay open on the floor, as if someone had been reading. The latest entry was dated the night before his disappearance. It read, "They come when the candle burns low. They live in the shadows. They whisper to me. They want me to join them." The candle beside me sputtered again, as if in response. I turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. The shadow in the corner was darker than the rest of the room, a void where light should have been. It wasn't cast by anything, no furniture, no objects. It was just there, and it was moving. A chill gripped my spine as the shadow stretched toward me, shifting like liquid darkness. The whispers grew louder, unintelligible, yet insistent. I scrambled backward, knocking over the candle. The room plunged into total darkness, and I swore I felt something brush against my arm, cold, dry, like brittle leaves. I fumbled for my phone, its weak light barely illuminating the room. The shadow was gone, but I could still hear the whispers, circling me, filling my head. I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut on its own. The old wooden walls groaned as if the cabin itself was breathing. And then, I saw them, faces emerging. From the darkness, hollow eyes staring, mouths twisted in silent screams. They clawed at the walls, pressing against them as if trying to break through. My uncle's voice echoed in my head. "They live in the shadows." I don't remember how I got out. I ran, stumbling through the thick undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes, the whispers chasing me through the night. When I reached the town, I was covered in scratches, breathless, my mind a whirlwind of fear. The next morning, I returned with the sheriff, but the cabin was wrong. It looked older, more decayed than before. The furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust, untouched for years. My uncle's journal was nowhere to be found. The back room, it didn't exist. There was no door, no space where it should have been. But the worst part, the candle I had knocked over the night before was still there, standing upright, its wick freshly burned, as if something had relit it. I never went back. I never should have come here.